So, picture this. It's the summer of 1940. The German war machine looks absolutely unstoppable. I mean, it's just rolled through most of Europe in a few short weeks, and now it's got its sights set on Britain. The Luftwaffe, their air force, is coming off this incredible winning streak, and they are fully expecting another quick, decisive victory. But that's just not what happened. Against all the odds, Britain refused to break. So that brings us to the big question, the one we're going to unpack here. What went so wrong for the Germans? How did this seemingly invincible air force actually fail? All right, let's get into it. First things first, we've got to challenge that whole idea of invincibility. Because even while the Luftwaffe was riding high, looking like the baddest force on the planet, there were some serious cracks starting to show just beneath the surface. And this, right here, is a pretty shocking number when you think about it. Before the Battle of Britain even really kicked off, the Luftwaffe was already hurting. The campaign in France, while a victory, had cost them big time. We're talking nearly a third of their bombers and dive bombers, gone. A fifth of their best fighters, the Bf-109s, wiped out. They were walking into the biggest fight of their lives, already seriously wounded. And you know who knew it? The pilots. The guys actually in the cockpit. While the top brass was predicting an easy win, the airmen who had actually gone up against British Spitfires over Dunkirk, they knew better. They'd seen what the RAF could do, and they knew this was going to be an absolutely brutal fight. So not only was German command underestimating their own problems, they were massively underestimating Britain's strengths. I mean, Britain had the biggest navy in the world, it had the backing of its huge empire and the US, and it had a secret weapon, the doubting system. This thing was a game changer, a totally revolutionary air defense network that connected radar stations to a central command. It let the RAF see German raids coming and intercept them with deadly precision. This was never going to be a simple knockout blow. But the Luftwaffe's issues weren't just about missing planes or a tough enemy. The rot really started at the very top. The entire German command structure was a mess of internal fighting, built way more on ego than on smart strategy. And the difference in leadership styles is just night and day. On the German side, you've got Hermann Goering, a total narcissist who's got this super cautious general on one side and a reckless one on the other. Their egos were constantly clashing, which just created chaos. On the British side, you had commanders, Dowding, Park, and Lee-Mallory, who were known rivals, but when it really mattered, they put their differences aside and worked together, carefully managing their resources to make sure fighter command could live to fight another day. And this toxic leadership led directly to some truly terrible intelligence. See, Goering's intelligence chief, this guy Beppo Schmid, was basically a professional yes man. His main job, it seems, was to tell Goering exactly what he wanted to hear, constantly downplaying British strength and feeding him these wildly optimistic reports. And here's what that looks like in practice. Just look at this gap. By early September, German intelligence was telling their commanders that RAF Fighter Command was basically finished, totally wiped out. But the reality, the British still had over 600, maybe even 700 fighters ready to go. This isn't just a rounding error, it's a catastrophic failure of intelligence. They were flying blind. The Germans were also fighting with a huge home field disadvantage. Their airfields in occupied France were pretty makeshift. A lot of them were still half-built. Famous planes like their Stuka dive bomber were suddenly looking really vulnerable against modern fighters. And this is maybe the most important part, if a British pilot got shot down over England, he could parachute out, have a cup of tea, and be back in a new plane by the afternoon. If a German pilot went down, he was captured, lost for the entire war. So you take all these strategic problems, all these logistical headaches, and you can imagine the immense psychological weight it put on the German pilots. The endless flights over that cold gray water, it started to take a very real, very human toll. They actually had a name for it, Kanalkrankheit, channel sickness. And this wasn't just, being tired of fighting. It was a very specific kind of psychological exhaustion and dread, all tied to the unique danger of flying over the English Channel so far from any friendly territory. This channel sickness showed up in some pretty awful ways. It started to affect them physically. Guys were losing a ton of weight, dealing with chronic sickness, turning to anything they could find, alcohol, cigarettes, just to get through the day. And from the body, it moved to the mind. The constant, relentless strain was just immense, leading to this wave of depression that just crushed the morale of even the most experienced pilots. But underneath it all was this deep, primal fear, the absolute terror of being shot down over the water. The thought of a slow, freezing death in the channel was so powerful that some airmen would carry pistols with them not to fight the enemy, but for themselves, just in case. And the scary part is the leadership was being warned this was happening. I mean, as early as mid-August, a flight doctor sent this desperate letter basically saying, if we don't get these men some relief soon, their nerves are going to be completely shot. The breaking point wasn't just coming, it was right around the corner. Which brings us to the final fatal mistake. With the Luftwaffe already stretched to its limit, physically and mentally, a single emotional decision was made that would completely change the battle, and maybe even the entire war. Here's the chain reaction. It's almost hard to believe. First, a lost German bomber crew accidentally drops its bombs on London. Churchill, in response, orders a small, symbolic bombing raid on Berlin. Well, this sends Hermann Goering into a rage, and in a fit of personal pride, he makes a disastrous blunder. He orders the Luftwaffe to stop attacking the RAF airfields, the very targets they were so close to breaking, and instead turn all their attention to bombing the city of London. This was a catastrophic mistake. For one, it gave the RAF's battered airfields and pilots a desperately needed break to repair and rearm. But it also stretched the German fighters to their breaking point. A Bf 109 flying escort over the coast had maybe 30 minutes of fuel for actual fighting. To push all the way to London, that cut their combat time down to just 10 minutes. 10 minutes! They were basically flying with the fuel light already on. And really, this gets to the heart of it all, attrition. It became a numbers game. Britain was actually outproducing Germany in fighter planes, and while they were short on pilots, their deficit was only about 10%. The Germans, on the other hand, were consistently missing a third of the pilots they needed. They just couldn't replace their losses, not the planes, and especially not the men. On September 15th, the Luftwaffe launched this one last massive daylight raid on London. They were convinced the RAF was finally done for. Instead, they were met by a huge swarm of fighters. The attack was a total disaster, and with it, the spirit of the Luftwaffe was completely and utterly broken. That realization, the fact that the battle was lost, was a devastating blow. In the weeks that followed, there were around 80 recorded suicides or suicide attempts among the air crews. It's a tragic number that really shows the human cost of this massive strategic failure. So in the end, the Luftwaffe's defeat wasn't about one single thing. It was this perfect storm of underestimating the enemy, relying on terrible intelligence, facing logistical nightmares, and having a command structure that was just crippled by ego. It all came to a head in that one fatal decision, a decision born not of strategy, but of pure pride. And it really leaves you with a pretty powerful thought, doesn't it? How many other turning points in history were decided not by a brilliant plan, but by simple human pride?